Well, you've certainly heard a lot about it in the news media, but what do you really know about the Mueller indictment? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, it occurs to me that most people have not read the indictment that got handed down as part of the probe led by Robert Mueller, and announced by Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. So I actually read the thing. Craziness that sounds like. And let me give you just kind of an overview and then ask you a couple of questions, because what I was reading in the newspaper didn't sound like the same thing that I was reading in the indictment itself. So an indictment, by the way, is a series of charges. It's not a judgment. It's not a ruling. It's not a verdict, okay? It is allegations that are being made by prosecutors, essentially, and now they have to be adjudicated, or they could be adjudicated, assuming that it was able to hold muster in court, and they could make this case against these people who will never appear in the United States, and so it's probably not going to happen. Anyway, here's the allegation, or a series of allegations, actually, that Russian military intelligence officers created a series of shell companies that mounted a rather substantial effort. And we're talking about hiring more than 100 people, spending millions of dollars. At one point, they were chewing through about $1.25 million a month to create chaos in the American political system. They paid for rallies, they paid for ads on social media, news releases, posters, and a Hillary Clinton impersonator in a cage. That, by the way, seemed to be a very popular thing. It seemed like the only way, if you're not running a social media network, the only way to get money out of these guys was to actually impersonate Hillary Clinton in a cage. They created,
I'd pay to see that.
Yeah. They created fake personas so that they could disseminate divisive news and opinion. They scammed the State Department, banks, social media companies, journalists, and some unnamed political volunteers that are. It's not quite clear if they were actually working for campaigns or just volunteering for campaigns or what the relationship was. Anyway, all of this started more than a year before Donald Trump announced his candidacy for the presidency.
Imagine.
But by April 2016, these Russians decided that they would pump Trump and try to trip up Hillary. And after the election, oddly enough, after Trump won, they actually paid for, the allegation is that they paid for 2 rallies. One rally was to celebrate Trump's victory. The other rally was to say that Trump is not my president. And they were paying for both of them. So now it is possible that they did all of this out of pure hatred for Hillary Clinton, who, by the way, back in 2014 was like the only person we knew for sure was going to run for office or had a chance at being her party's nominee. But it seems more likely that they intended to do this to sow discord among the American people and to cast doubt about the reliability of our electoral system. Now, the indictment is an indictment, so it doesn't actually say whether or not any of these efforts were successful. For example, they organize rallies. The indictment doesn't even say if the rally happened. It just says that they organized the rally. It doesn't report the results of this activity on social media and these rallies and these posters and even the hacking of the DNC email server, which, by the way, they hacked the RNC email server unsuccessfully, but they were successful in getting at the DNC's emails. So none of this produces any kind of information about outcomes. It's all allegations against Russians. No American is implicated in this directly, saying, hey, they colluded with the Russians to do this. Some Americans were duped. But Bill Whittle, the Americans that were duped include volunteers in the Trump campaign, but also people at social media companies, the State Department, which issued travel documents, banks, which helped them to set up accounts, and PayPal. Journalists who disseminated news that was sent to them by these phony Russians who were trying to sow discord. Bill, should we be focused on collusion among the banks, the journalists, the social media companies, and other odds and ends? Or should we just focus on President Trump because he's president?
It is a little bit troublesome for the left to discover that these activities began a year before Trump even announced his candidacy. And my first reaction to this is that reaction that you get sometimes, when you see one football team really trouncing another one, and the one coach says, "Oh, you're running up the score," and the other coach says, "Look, it's not my job to defend your goal line. It's so my real serious, honest response to this is the Russians are. To find out that the Russians were trying to influence an American election or do something to destabilize America, I consider not shocking in the least. This has been going on since there have been Russians.
Yeah.
And so do the Chinese, and so do the Iranians, and so does everybody else. Okay? It's not the Russians' job to it is the Russian intelligence agency's job to make life as difficult for America as they possibly can. So the real question is, if this actually was so successful, who could have been there to stop them? Let's see. What agency would be responsible for a large counterintelligence organization? The FBI. Well, fortunately, there's nothing to worry about there, because we know that the FBI is a bastion of righteousness and competence, and no bias there whatsoever. So as far as I'm concerned, if you really want to make this case, Democrats, if you really, really want to make this case that Russia was so involved with the U.S. electoral system that it actually influenced the vote, then I say the person that needs to hold the bag for this is the President of the United States of America, who allowed his Federal Bureau of Investigation to become so incompetent and so corrupt that something of this magnitude went by unheeded. That's what I would say.
Bill, just in fairness to the FBI, they announced that they were going after this possibility of Russian meddling in the election about a week or so after Facebook announced that they believed that they had been used by these Russians, and which that week is roughly 3 years after public reporting revealed that, meaning in news sources, revealed that the Russians were trying to influence elections in the United States.
And if I was an FBI agent, I would say to that, fine, why don't you put her in charge, man?
So, Stephen Green, it's a fascinating thing to see how these things go down, because I frankly think that Republicans are making a mistake by dismissing the entire thing out of hand, by making it seem like, oh, it's just a Mueller witch hunt trying to nail Trump. Well, maybe it is, and certainly you could make the case that indicting 12 Russians 4 days before President Trump goes to shake hands with the president of Russia may sound a little political. But maybe that's just the moment when they got the final I dotted and the final T crossed on the indictment. Nevertheless, unless they're completely making up these allegations out of whole cloth, it seems very clear that there was a large, active organization of dozens, perhaps more than 100 people who were working to plant stories on social media and to make those stories replicate and echo throughout the social media system, that they were buying advertisements, that they were organizing rallies, that they were using dupes in America to organize things for them. So something bad was going on, and it's illegal. All this stuff is illegal. It's illegal you can't be a foreign agent trying to influence a U.S. election without filing paperwork. You've got to document, you've got to say, hey, I'm a foreign entity or whatever. So they were illegally doing that, but they stole Social Security numbers, they opened bank accounts, they got false travel documents based on these fake personas. So lots of illegal stuff was going on here. As we saw the news conference this week, President Putin said that there is a long-standing treaty-based relationship between the United States and Russia, that basically Russia agrees to interrogate people in their country who were charged with crimes in other countries. And so in this case, in the United States. And he said that about 100 times a year, Russian intelligence officers or law enforcement officers will interrogate people on behalf of other countries. And Putin even invited U.S. authorities to send somebody over to observe those interrogations on their soil. So it's not extradition, but they're allowing them to do this. So
Does that happen before or after the champagne reception for these 12 guys? That's right. When they get back to the
Congratulations. Kremlin. So now here's the link, though. When we look at the link with Putin's government, okay, in addition to the fact that these guys were military intelligence officers, guys and gals, the company Concord Catering and Concord Management is the name of the other company, had some government contracts. So this was the shell company that they set up to be the front, to basically say, hey, we're a legit company. And then they used proceeds from that and the fact that they had a corporation to be able to conduct these other sort of espionage activities. Should Republicans, Steve, jump on this and say justice should be done? We will not tolerate foreign powers and forget about President Trump in this whole thing?
Wow, that's an awful lot. First, I kind of want to echo something Bill said. Finding out that the Russians are engaging in espionage, it's like finding out that the Brits have a fleet, or that the Germans have invaded France, or that Stormy Daniels is getting motorboated by patrons at a strip club. It's just what they do. And they've done it for a long time, and they're very good at it. And what we have found out over the course of this investigation is that we are vulnerable. And we've known that we're vulnerable because we are an open society. That's the way it works. That's the trade-off. Open societies have weaknesses, okay? Our computer networks freely communicate, and that can be taken advantage of. Our banks are open to business for almost anybody. That can be taken advantage of. We have free elections, and apparently anybody has this freedom of speech thing and can organize rallies. These are the weaknesses of an open society. However, have you ever gone to war against an open society and won? No. I cannot think of a case where an authoritarian state has gone to war against a free country and in the end won, because open societies have resources and strengths that authoritarian states cannot match and never will. And so we have to take some of these vulnerabilities and accept them and embrace them and strengthen them where and when we can. But if the idea is that we have to protect Trump at all costs, or to take down Trump at all costs, which seems to be the thing. You know, you started this off by trying to set aside the hype, but I'm not sure you can do that, because the hype is the point. In the end, the Russians want to discredit the U.S. system by generating hype, because as we become more like them, we lose those strengths that the Soviets couldn't beat, that the Nazis couldn't beat, that the Imperial Japanese couldn't beat, that nobody can beat, because open societies are, in the end, far, far stronger. So the hype, Scott, cannot be set aside. The hype is the point. And every one of these guys, from Mueller to Strzok to even some of the Republicans in Congress, are helping to generate the hype that serves Russia's purposes.
In my dream world, the Republican Party, actually the ones who are elected to office, function in their legislative roles and do what's really required when they investigate something. And when charges are made, they evaluate those charges on the basis of what the charges actually are. To have the president shouting over and over and over, there was no collusion, there was no collusion. The indictment document doesn't say there was collusion, okay? And he's been saying that for a long time. Fine. You're the one who's talking about collusion, Mr. President. Stop talking about collusion, okay? Because the document says the Ruskies did a bunch of bad stuff. And our focus now should be on not necessarily saying, hey, our election in 2016 was ruined because of Russian efforts, but that Russians are trying to corrupt our electoral process. They failed to do so. You know, and in fact, there's no evidence that any of these rallies or social media ads swayed a single vote. You know, they didn't really have any kind of measurable impact. But I don't think we should sit by idly while millions of dollars are being spent by hundreds of people are at work sowing discord in our country. In fact, if anything, it should bring us together as Americans. And it should make us a lot more skeptical before we circulate a story on social media. You know, you've heard the expression, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. It's about time we started thinking caveat retweetor and getting serious about the fact that information is something. It's not nothing. It's not tapping the button and sending out stuff that you don't even know if it's true. And so even before you circulate this video, do a little research. Read the frickin' indictment. You know, think for yourself. It's unbelievable what can happen to a country that is being torn apart from the inside with the slightest effort on the part of bad actors on the outside. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.
Speaking of bad actors on the outside, traffic is horrible here today.